From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. And thank you for being here in the African Middle East Reading Room, where we're holding our, I believe it's our 27th Conversations with African Poets and Writers. I'm Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the Division, and I am going to say a few words about our division, which is responsible for the collections for 78 countries in Africa, Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. We want to invite you to come and use our collections, read our books, and follow us on Facebook and read our blogs, because all this is a way of us sharing with you the treasures that we have here at the Library of Congress and in the African Middle East Division. The Conversations with African Poets and Writers was established here about 5 years ago, and although it started with an original event more than 8 years ago, when we had the great writer Achebe, Chinua Achebe, who was here with us. We also had Ali Mazrui, who actually launched the series. But since then, we've had about 6 programs a year, 3 in the spring and 3 in the fall, roughly speaking. And we've done that with the Poetry and Literature Center here at the library, that has been established for a very long time, that holds the Poet Laureate of the United States, that brings in poets and writers from all over the world. And the Poetry Center co-sponsors this program. We are also co-sponsoring this program from the onset with the Africa Society of the Summit, of the National Summit on Africa, which is the largest educational institution focusing on Africa throughout the United States. It's an NGO. And today, we are going to also inaugurate formally our partnership with Howard University and with and who is so well represented by Professor Ambai Cham, a writer, author, film editor, and a multifaceted and Renaissance man, who is also joining us in this partnership on the collection of, on our Conversations with African Poets and Writers. And now, having said that, I would like to invite him to say a few words about Howard University and about himself in this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure. We're really thrilled and honored to be officially a partner in this very important series here. And this partnership really builds on a history of strong relationship between Howard University and the Library of Congress, particularly the Middle Eastern and Africa Division. We are very happy at the Center for African Studies. It's a new federally funded Title VI National Resource Center for African Studies. At Howard University, we had a grant in 2014, and the center basically functions as a hub to coordinate all of the Africa-related research, teaching, and creative work going on at Howard, which is practically really every school and every college in Africa, there's some kind of activity going there related to Africa. And the center also does a lot of promotion and teaching of African languages, and promoting also African area studies courses. And one of the important components of the center is a very robust outreach program that we have also to K through 12, community colleges, minority serving institutions, HBCUs, and four-year colleges. And this is something that we take very seriously. It's another avenue outlet for us to partner with different institutions, particularly in the area, to really promote different portraits, different images, different more enabling kind of understandings of Africa. And we're very happy to be part of this very important series that we think is one that contributes very much to creating these different kinds of understandings of Africa. And we're particularly happy to welcome our guest who will be introduced shortly. But just to say thank you very much for providing us the honor, Mary Jane, Patricia, Africa Society, to be partners with you in this important series here. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Conversations with African Poets and Writers. We are honored this afternoon to be with Mr. Abubakar Ibrahim, an accomplished African writer and author, and a fine example of what we like to call shattering stereotypes and perceptions about a lack of African literature. Africa writes, and so because we have an expression at the Africa Society, Africa matters, and so we encourage you to read African literature. And this exemplifies the work that we do. We engage and educate Americans about Africa so as to create a better understanding of the continent's peoples, cultures, economies, and accomplishments. So let's talk a little bit about Mr. Ibrahim. Abubakar Adam Ibrahim was born in Jos, Nigeria. Growing up, he always had an intrinsic desire to write, and encouraged by his brother, he did just that. He has written exceptional pieces of literature. His debut collection of short stories, The Whispering Trees, was listed for the Etisalat Prize for Literature in 2014, with the title story that was shortlisted for the Kane Prize of African Writing. His debut novel, Season of Crimson Blossom, was published in the UK by Cassava Republic Press, and tells the captivating story of an illicit affair between a devout 55-year-old widow and grandmother and a street gang leader. It takes place in a conservative Muslim community in northern Nigeria, set against the backdrop of political unrest. But Mr. Ibrahim has been the recipient and has won many awards and accolades, including a BBC African Prize, among other awards, and a Gabriel Garcia Marquez Fellow, and a, just a second here, Civitelli Ranieri Fellow. He was also named in 2014 at the Hay Festival Africa 39 list of the most promising writers under the age of 40, who will define the future of African writing. And I'm sure you'll see that shortly. He's also the recipient of the 2016 Goethe Institute and Silt Foundation African Residency Award. And I was also able to get for your own information. I asked him to tell me something that's not on here and share with us a hobby, and he says to me that he enjoys watching only Barcelona. So join me in welcoming Mr. Ibrahim to the podium. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here after Patricia somehow contrived to extract that very vital piece of information from me. It is a pleasure being here and having you, the wonderful people, being in the audience to listen to me read. I've been told I'm supposed to read for 15, 20 minutes. So apparently I don't have much time, so I'll just get down to it. So like Patricia said, the book is principally about the relationship between a 55-year-old widow and a street gang leader who is 30 years younger than her. And it's set against the backdrop of political violence in northern Nigeria. So the first section I'm going to read talks about a character whose name is Faiza. She's 15. But she's been traumatized by some of the things she has seen, but no one really understands what she's going through. But this was what happened to her. So that November morning, she knew she wanted to be by his side, by her father's side, when the news reached them. He had returned from the dawn prayers and was hoping to catch the result of the previous day's election on the BBC Hausa service. He had just turned on his shortwave radio when a neighbor, Umaru Sanda, barged in. "What are you still doing here when the whole town has gone gaga?" But because not even Umaru Sanda's dimwit wife paid much attention to Umaru Sanda, her father hadn't taken any notice. How could there be another riot when so many policemen had been deployed for the elections? But the sounds of gunshots drawing ever closer vindicated Sanda, who had since left to evacuate his family. Because they had lived through riots in 2001, 2002, and 2004, they knew their neighborhood was not safe. Their legs were far outnumbered. So Muazu started packing up valuables, and Jamilu tried to roll the mattress off the bed. Amina clung to her mother's wrapper. Both were crying. Gunshots thundered close by. Then the banshee screams of Umaru Sanda's wife leapt at them from across the fence and shredded, with decided finality, any hope they had that the unfolding nightmare ending before it fully manifested. "Where is he? Where is he?" There was a heavy bang on the door. Amid so much screaming and so many enraged voices, no one could be certain what was happening. Muazu snapped out of his stupor first. "The bathroom, quick!" It was the sound of desperation in her father's voice that struck Faiza. And when she tried to look into his eyes for some reassurance, he turned his face away. They crammed into the bathroom, all 5 of them, and locked the door. In the small space, they waited, like the cows Faiza had seen packed into open trucks at the NYK market on their way to the slaughterhouse. The smell of overnight piss, still waiting to be flushed in the toilet bowl, swelled. But above it, the raw stench of fear made Faiza's head turn. She wanted to bend down, but bumped into Jamilu. "Watch it," it was a whisper. "Shh." Even in that whispered word, there was anxiety in her father's voice. Amina began whimpering and would have started wailing but for Asabe, who hugged her tightly, hushing her and suppressing her own cries. "Keep her quiet." Now there was anger in Muazu's voice. Asabe held the girl and clasped her hand over her mouth. Then she herself started whimpering, her steady drone filling the silence. Jamilu wriggled his way to the top of the toilet bowl and squatted, resting his weight on his legs. Faiza heaved and wriggled into the little space her brother had vacated. When they heard the front door being bashed in, Asabe's stomach rumbled like a disgruntled volcano. "I want to use the toilet." Jamila's foot slipped and he hurtled into his father's back. They crashed into the door. The commotion outside blanketed the noise and they waited, holding their breath. "Ayatul Kursi," Muazu ordered. Faiza mechanically started reciting the verse from memory. "In the toilet?" Jamilu was incredulous. "In your hands." But they froze as they heard the doors being broken down and furniture overturned, the crash of the TV and the splintering of glass. Some maniac hacked at the wall with a machete, the angry sound of metal on concrete, and his hate-filled scream jarring Faiza's nerves. The warm smell of shit bloated and filled the room. Faiza turned to her mother and saw her mouth moving mindlessly, her face, in the dim light, glistening with tears and sweat. Faiza felt a hand searching for hers and knew it was her father. He squeezed it and quickly let go. But she still sensed the trembling. When they broke down the bathroom door, her father went first, hands raised above his head. Faiza felt a warm liquid run down her thighs and pool around her feet. "Spare my children, please." Muazu knelt down before the armed mob that had invaded the house. "Kill him! Kill him! What are you waiting for?" It was a woman. Faiza knew then that she would never forget the voice of that woman. She would never forget the hate in it. She perceived the contagious nature of hate that makes one want to murder people they have never interacted with, or people with whom they have eaten from the same bowl, mourned alongside and shared laughter with, people with whom they have nurtured the verdant canopy of a friendship that was, on occasions, closer to kinship. But that woman's voice, in one sweep, ripped that canopy, letting the pieces fall heavily like shredded foliage around their feet. Faiza stepped forward and saw the face of Jacob James, her math teacher, who always dressed smartly, his shirt ironed and tucked in with a neatly knotted tie. The students made fun of his study brogues because they had never seen him wear any other shoes. He always smiled at their jokes, but that morning he was not smiling. His face, made fierce by war paint, glistened with sweat and odium as he raised his machete and brought it down. Bright red blood, warm and sticky, splashed across Faiza's face and dotted in a fine spray the short pink nightdress that her father had bought her. So that is the first section I'm going to read. I have an aversion for depicting violence in my works, but because there's a lot of violence going on in Nigeria as a whole, and in the north especially, it kind of forms an important background to the story. So I'm going to read the different section now. Like I said earlier, at the heart of the story, there's this affair between a 55-year-old woman who is a devout Muslim, a mother and a grandmother with a grandmother who is 30 years younger than her. So in spite of this violence going on, people still live or attempt to live as normally as they can, and you can stop people from falling in love, from having relationships, from even in refugee camps. So this is an encounter between Binta, who is the main character in the novel, and her lover, Hassan Reza. She drifted, almost weightlessly, in the pungent smell of weed. It was only when she opened her eyes and saw him sitting shirtless by the window, puffing on the joint in his hand, that she realized where she was. Binta stretched and yawned. "Hassan, stop smoking that thing in here. You could get arrested. Besides, it's giving me a headache." With his back turned to her, she could not see his face. She propped herself up on her elbow and remembered that she was naked under the sheet. Her clothes were on the chair across the room. She had taken them off one after the other and folded them carefully while he had waited on the bed. Just action. She smiled at the now familiar tingling that tore her insides, as she did on the hook of her bra. "You must have been on something." He turned to her and smiled, and she saw how handsome he looked, how his glazed eyes seemed so peaceful and yet so far away, how young he really was. Action, Sallah. He raised his joint at her before putting it back to his lips. He looked at her then turned back to the window and watched the sprinklers watering the lawn. "God, what am I doing?" Her voice was low because she was addressing herself. "What?" "I don't know. You're so young, Hassan. I don't know if this is right." "Why must it be right?" He spoke with a timbre in his voice. the one she had come to associate with what she had called his inner self, the dreamy-eyed philosopher awakened by ganja fumes. Why must anything be right or wrong? Why can't things be just the way they are? She sighed. When you smoke this thing, I don't know what it does to you. You just talk rubbish sometimes. He smiled and put the joint to his lips. Maybe you should try it. God forbid. I want you to quit. It's killing you. He shrugged. What doesn't? I will die when I die. We all will. You understand? Pinto sighed again. My daughter was saying something earlier today about some stupid flower that waits a lifetime to bloom. 30 years, she said. And when it does, after all those years, it smells like a corpse. Ha ha. What sort of flower is that? I was just thinking how much like that flower I am. I waited my whole life to feel as I do when I'm with you, you know. I shouldn't be telling you such things, but I just need to get it off my chest, you know. No one has ever made me feel this way. But like that flower, after all those years waiting, when I bloom, it doesn't feel right. I don't know if you understand me. He continued to puff on the joint, looking disturbingly peaceful. You mean it stinks? She surprised herself with her laughter. It rocked her. She laughed for a while, sniffling as she did. When she managed to stop, she wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes. But they wouldn't stop, even after she no longer felt amused. That was when she knew she was actually crying. Save the occasional movements of his hand to guide the joint to his lips. He kept still, as if reading the cipher in the calling fumes. It took him a while to speak. You know, when I was a young boy, there was this Eid day, and we were so excited with our new clothes. There was this cheap brocade our father bought for us. It was called Shrinkan. It was kind of in vogue then, you understand? She knew it. She had bought it for her children too, around 93. It had been a fallout from the political campaigns when the borders had been opened to cheap commodities that politicians had used to entice voters. All sorts of things had come in: salt, sugar, strange soaps with too much soda that scalded the hands, and bleached clothes, cheap shiny fabrics that colored the water they were to be washed in, petrol with blue, pink, and green hues. But the elections had been annulled when the military decided against handing over to the civilians. Instead, Shonika was put in charge until he was upended in a palace coup not long after. His name was given to all the commodities, or strange commodities, that traders had hoarded from the political campaigns and which flooded the markets as soon as the politicking was over. Mine was white, sparkling and starched. We had just returned from the Eid and I was going to take it off so I wouldn't stain it while I ate rice and stew. You understand? Then Aminu, my little brother, my half-brother, accidentally spilled ink on it. He smoked his joint until she realized he had finished his story. When he turned to her and saw her perplexed face, he smiled with glazed eyes. We are like clothes, you understand? We get rumpled and creased and torn, sometimes irreparably. Some of us are stitched up, patched up, others are discarded. Some clothes are fortunate, others are not. They are born into misfortune and ink spills and whatnot. You understand? She rolled her eyes, chasing the meaning of what he had said. Hassan Reza, you are high. He raised the stub in his hand in acknowledgement and took one long last drag. You really need to give up the distance. Be a good man, for God's sake. I am what I am. He crushed the stub in the ashtray and turned to her. And what about that issue? About going back to school? He wagged a finger in front of his face. No talk, just action, you understand? Seriously, Hassan? No, not now, please. I have an important assignment from my boss. Maybe after that. What assignment? Very important, you understand? Very important. So that is the second section I'll be reading. Lastly, I'll read. The whole of the story, this relationship takes place in a very conservative Muslim community. It's a very close society where everyone sort of knows what everyone is doing. So eventually this affair between Binta and Reza is exposed, and this was what happened when some women found out about it. Following the incident at Laraba's, thoughts of entirely forfeiting her studies at the madrasa had crossed her mind overnight. But realizing that her silence would have encouraged these rumors, burying her in shame, Binta decided to face her accusers, and before it grew any worse, put an end to their malice. She was still thinking of the Sharia's ruling on falsely accusing decent women of depravity when she reached the madrasa and found two groups of women. One was huddled around Maria, while she tried to impress them in wares from the huge bag beneath her desk: makeup kits, perfumes from Arabia, henna from India, bottled honey, and the usual variety of sex boosters and creams. Another group had formed at the back, clustered around Malama Ummah, going over previous lessons under the guidance of the matron. Ustaz Noura was not in class, neither was his wife, Murja. Binta was enthralled by some of the wares on Maria's desk and reached for a jar of pure honey. When she asked if it was definitely pure, Maria scolded at her. "Well, it isn't adulterated, if that's what you mean." The other women turned to her. Binta felt cowed by the attention. "Well, you know, sometimes people do add sugar." "Binta, keep my tin if you are not buying. Who are you to come here with accusations?" "Imagine the hyena calling a dog a savage," Maria hissed. That wasn't how Binta imagined the scenario would play out. And before she could marshal her thoughts, Ladidi, the skinny woman famed for her half-dozen divorces and her children, fathered by as many men, waved her hand before her nose and cleared her throat. "What is that god-awful smell?" The women sniffed the air, and having failed to perceive it, they turned to Ladidi. After an appropriate interval in which Ladidi savored their attention, she made a declaration that stunned the entire class, including Madam Ummah's earnest group devoted to the study of hadiths and the rare. "It's the smell of zina, wallahi. I could perceive it from anywhere. There is a fornicator in this class." And she spat and turned her back to the slimy markers that slid solidly down the wall. "Who are you calling a fornicator, Ladidi? Are you making false accusations against me? Can you prove anything?" Ladidi chuckled. "Who mentioned your name?" she hissed. "But did they not say a guilty person would sweat even in the rain?" Aikin Banza. Binta put down the bottle of honey on the table, and in the heavy silence that followed, walked to her seat in the middle of the class. She sat down and bowed her head. But then Shafa'atu, the young bride who was stationed just behind her and was queasy already with the burgeoning seed inside her, got up abruptly and knocked over her bag in the process. She gathered her books from the floor and, holding her hand over her mouth, hurried out of the class. Ladidi adjusted her hijab, spat on the floor, cast a sidelong glance at Binta, whose head was still bowed, and walked out of the class. Two other women followed her. And then Madam Ummah resumed her tutorials with a voice made unnecessarily loud as to take in the entire class, and with a fervor that was driven by restrained fury. Binta could hear her, but she was not listening. The words cascaded off her consciousness and registered only in the background of her thoughts. Her mind was numbed by the recollection of the silence that had accompanied her to her seat. Her vision was blurred by the film of tears that lingered in her eyes, because she would not let them run down her cheeks. She had no idea how long she sat like that, head bowed, tears imprisoned in her eyes, and a whistling silence in her mind. When she stood up, she became conscious of the abrupt silence around her. She picked up her bag and walked out with as much dignity as she could muster, her pace measured, her shoulders held straight, defiant even. But inside, she could feel the weight of her heart, and it felt so much heavier than she ever remembered. Thank you very much.
But before starting my questions, I'd like to congratulate you on your most recent award, the Nigerian Prize for Literature, the 2016 Nigerian Prize for Literature. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
And congratulations on a beautiful story.
Thank you.
My first question would be, when did you actually start writing? And why did you turn to the novel as a literary genre?
When did I start writing as general, or when did I start writing this book?
In general.
In general. I wish I can remember.
It can't be that far back.
Well, for someone who has lived as long as I have, which is not very long, but this is something I've always been doing. I've always been interested in telling stories, in, somehow capturing a narrative. Even before I could write, I was drawing pictures that somehow connected and formed a story, have this narrative arc. And then when I could read and write, I just took off, So, yeah, I think at the point I consciously started writing, I was 13. By the time I was 18, I was sure it was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So here we are.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
In a previous interview, you noted that northern Nigeria is severely underrepresented in the canon of Nigerian literature. Now, northern Nigeria has a literary tradition dating back, 9th, 10th century. So is there a uniqueness in northern Nigeria literature, and particularly in the present climate of northern Nigeria literature?
Well, when you talk about northern Nigerian literature, it has a history. You've been to Nigeria before, and you know the history we have of writing in the north of Nigeria, which dates back for ages, But the thing is this, the literature you find is written mostly in what is called Ajami, which is using Arabic letters to capture words and phrases in Hausa. And that dates back to, I don't know how long. The Arabs first came to the north of Nigeria in the 14th century, so that influence has been there. What you've had is that there has been a tradition of writing in the north. I remember in the 19th century, there was a German translation of a love poem from Hausa into German by a German explorer who happened to travel to the north. So there has been this history of writing, right? And most recently, you have this huge literature in Hausa that is being produced, which is something I reflected in this book. It's called the Soyayya novels. Mostly they are love stories written by women, but they are written in Hausa. So it is for the consumption of people who speak Hausa. So it's essentially the North talking to itself about the North, about their own issues. But when you talk about Nigerian literature in English, there is a shortage of material from the north of Nigeria. So I felt it was important to kind of drag the north of Nigeria into the mainstream of Nigerian literature in that sense, and start up conversations about people, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, if you like, by the different people of Nigeria. People in the east have different ideas about the people in the north, and vice versa. So it's all over the place. And I felt that literature is one of the ways that we could break down those barriers and create better understanding of people. But because the North is not writing its own stories in a way that people outside of that region would understand, there is this constant, should I say, projection of stereotypes and stale ideas that are not essentially true about the region, about its people.
So that was what I wanted to do with the work.
Thank you. Now, in your debut novel, you're speaking quite openly about female sexuality, which is pretty much a socially taboo subject in northern Nigeria.
Yeah.
You also address a number of other social issues. So what really was your intent in writing this novel?
Well, the principal intent was to tell a good story. Principally, that was the intent. But then along the line, you realize that as you are trying to capture the story of these two characters who happen to have this relationship across class divide and all that, other things come into play. Because they are from different age, they are from different backgrounds. The social, cultural context has to have an impact, And all these things came together in the narration, in how the story played out, and how the characters think and how they behave, in essence. So yeah, that was essentially the principal objective, to tell a good story. Talking about sexuality, it's a very important thing, I think, because it dictates a lot of things that people don't even want to acknowledge. Someone said that if you look at the history of the world, most of the conflicts could have been avoided if people have probably had better sexual relations with their partners. And if you think about it critically, it's somehow true, because someone might wake up with some kind of sexual frustration one way or the other, and something that is very insignificant will suddenly take on a whole new dimension in his mind, And then there's been a lot of trouble because of people having sex with people they shouldn't be having sex with. Someone who is very reasonable, very rational, has sex with someone who is not supposed to have sex with, and then ends up doing very stupid things, And then you have stupid people having sex with people they shouldn't have sex with, and then doing smart things. So it has different kind of impacts on people, and that is essentially what Binta and Reza were doing. In the North, we don't want to talk about sex. We pretend we don't do it, but that is not true. And I've been asked before, so where's this story coming from? I said, look at the population of the North. I mean, something has to be happening for all of these children to be coming from somewhere. And the truth is that the North is very conservative. It is a very religious community in the sense that it is religious both ways. The Muslim North is very religious, the Christian North is equally very religious. So we have all this conflict of religion, of faith, and it merges so much with the culture that at some point you don't know where religion ends and where culture begins. So people talk about sex, sexual relationship in hushed tones, And I felt it's important to kind of bring it into the foreground, into the mainstream of conversation, so that we understand exactly what is happening. The story here is about Binta, who, for the better part of her life, has been sexually frustrated because her relationship with her husband hasn't been, wasn't great. Essentially, he was a stranger to her, and she just married him out of obedience to her parents' command, And for the bulk of her life, when she wanted to take initiatives in their sexual relationship, she was put down very strongly, and it had an impact on her. And then after her husband died, she had this opportunity of having a relationship with someone who is much younger than her, but someone who was capable of giving her what she had always desired. And all of a sudden, the society said, wait, this is our business. Who you do things with in your bedroom is exactly our business, so we are going to intervene and do stuff about it.
I would ask you, are you speaking for women or as a man? But that's another whole question. Yeah. Another question that I do have is, when you look at the literary creations that are emerging throughout Africa, throughout the African diaspora, Are there certain trends, are there certain themes that are emerging in this literary world? And where does your work fit into this new literary trend?
Where it fits, I think I would let the experts and the academic decide. My job is to write a book, which I've done. So I'm giving the academics something to work with, I hope. But yes, there's a new voice coming out of the continent, and it is bold, and some people think it's irreverent as well. I think it is both, and I think it's become necessary because there are barriers that have been there for ages and ages, and those barriers need to go for whatever reason. We need to advance. We need to talk about things we are not talking about. 10 years ago, maybe I wouldn't have written a book like this, But then, these are things we need to really talk about. How these relationships affect the way we think, the way we grow up, and the way our society is shaped eventually, So we are having writers from different parts of the continent talking about things that are rooted in their own societies and their own communities, and they are pushing the barriers, challenging the frontiers. And I think it's important because the world is opening up, and Africa needs to open up as well. And we can't do that unless we push down barriers and have conversations about the things that shape the way we think. So that is a very important thing, and I'm very proud to be part of this generation that is challenging those frontiers and breaking down those barriers.
Okay. And my final question to you would be, what steps need to be taken to bring recognition from the international community to African literary scholarship? Or do you think steps need to be taken?
Well, of course there are things that need to be done, and I think it starts with us, the writers and the Africans and all of us. We need to tell our own stories. We need to believe in our own stories and believe in our own voice, and tell our stories the way they should be told. I think because the publishing industry is based in the West, if you like, they are the gatekeepers, so they determine which stories from Africa come out there, which ones are considered good enough to be published by whoever wants to publish them. But when you have publishers on the continent, and we've had a few of them coming up in Nigeria, for instance, Kosovo Republic, represented by Emma Shercliffe, they're doing a wonderful job, and they're giving African writers the boldness to tell their stories the way they want it to be told. And I think that is the first step. We need the stories to be available first before later maybe we can sort them out and say, okay, let's have a conversation about these things. But the important thing is we need to write, and we need to tell our stories.
Okay, I thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I congratulate you on your debut novel. At this point, we'll have a Q&A, a brief Q&A session. And I'd also like to note that the author will do book signings down in the gift shop following this program. So for any of you who are interested in books, we'll go to the gift shop.
Thank you very much. I love the readings and the way you answer the questions and everything. But so I have a question.
Yes.
You talk about breaking the barriers and telling your own story. Can you say something more about the barriers? What are the barriers that are holding back young writers from writing, potential writers from writing? Yeah.
Okay. For instance, right, from the north of Nigeria where I come from, where I've spoken about this rich literary tradition that we have, we write what we call Soya novels, which in essence translate as romance novels, right? But then in these romance novels, you don't have any kind of contacts between unmarried people in public spaces, in private spaces. You don't talk about sex, And that is the way the culture has shaped people not to engage with these issues. So you have people falling in love, but you don't talk about them kissing or holding hands or, you know. And then you talk about married people having relationships, and you avoid as much as you can the issues of sex and sexual frustration and the consequence of those things. So those are some of the barriers that are, holding people back. And as far as I'm concerned, there are issues that need to be tackled because they are at the heart of our orientation as a people, So there are subjects that are considered taboo in a way, sexuality and all that. But then people are challenging those issues and they're talking about them now. And I think it's important to start these conversations one way or the other. Those are some of the issues that people need to talk about. Second issue is that the lack of publishing infrastructure is a major issue. And I believe that if you have enough publishers on the continent, you have more than enough stories to tell, to be published, and to be shared with the world. So yeah, we're getting there somehow.
Okay, I would like to say a few things on the one. This is a short question and answer series. When you ask what the barriers, and when you ask what Africans can do to promote it, all I can say is he answer himself. Because I have identified 3 barriers. Actually, I am from Kano in Nigeria. I belong to the Cemetery Association back there and everywhere. Why I say is the answer is number one issue we have is the publishing industry. We don't have much local publishing industry. So he is part of a publication called Parasia, a publishing imprint, which is very successful. And part of the Kasama Republic is also a local publication outfit that is excelling very well. So when we develop our publishing industry, I think I want to go really faster. So he is the answer in this way. And secondly, the second barrier is English. We still like to speak our local language. So this is why we just write in Hausa. Because I'm a translator, I translated some short stories and this thing work with Jalada. He's also part of Jalada. So it's all around. So what helped, if I can say what helped him is he has been writing English all through. He was once an editor of the newspaper section. So it's really helped improve somebody writing in English as a medium. So this is another way why he is the answer. And the third way is book promotion. Like I don't think even himself he knows that somebody called Bashir Topa has written a short story book. Bashir Topa was once a presidential candidate in Nigeria, a very popular person. But because there wasn't book promotion, nobody knew about it. And just a few weeks ago, I was with Helen Havila, who published a book about Boko Haram. But I remember in Kano, the first book that was published was in Kano about Boko Haram, but the author, whom I have even forgotten about his name, did not promote his book. So if people like him will be going around the world promoting books by local authors, I think that is another way of the answer. So let me ask my question, sorry. Because I am the Nigeria country advisor for religious freedom in the Center for Islamic Religious Freedom here in DC, I would like to ask, your novel has talked a lot about violence, ethnic and religious. Did you frame anything around like religious freedom, because this is the area I'm attention?
Maybe if you read the book, you'll find out, right? But then again, he's Nigerian, so he spoke about certain issues. I knew Bashir Tofa had written a book, and he's not the only prominent northerner to have written a book. Tafawa Balewa, the first prime minister of Nigeria, was an author as well. So the tradition has always been there. In terms of book promotion, I think, I don't know, people kind of place these expectations on authors to, and that is because we don't have the publishing structure enough, but people have expectations on writers, to be publishers, to be book promoters, to be everything. It's simply not possible. Some people are good at writing, that's what they can do. Some people are good at promoting other people's work, and that's what they can do. So we need the structures, really. There are people who are struggling to be writers who, to be honest, shouldn't even bother. They should work in setting up structures, maybe be editors or something. I have people who have written books, and every day they ask me, where can we find an editor? And you have problems recommending editors to them because there aren't enough people training themselves to become editors. Everybody wants to write, everybody wants to publish. It's a challenge. So there's the need for that diversification to be there. So yeah. Religious freedom and whatnot. The North is a complex case. You and I know that, right? People use religion, and especially the leaders of that region, they use religion as a mechanism to suppress people, to keep them, subjugated. And it is not right, it is very wrong. I remember an instance where a cousin of mine went to serve in Kebbi State, which is far up in the north. And the idea of the youth service is, after graduating from university, you dedicate a year to serve your country. So you're posted to a different part from where you come from, and you kind of participate in some community service or something. So when he went there, a prominent citizen of that area said, these are people, the way you see them, just let them be. Don't try to influence them, don't try to change them, they will never change. So he couldn't understand. So after a few weeks there, he realized what was happening. That man, along with a few others, are the most educated people in that community. So there is nothing that the government would want to do to that community that doesn't have to come through them. So they don't want other people to be educated to come and participate in whatever is going on, in sharing ideas and all that. So often they get allocations from the government and they divert them to private use, and people don't know because they are the only ones who are, So we have this issue. We have, the attacks on the Emir of Kano, for instance, he is a religious leader in a way, and he's also a cultural leader, but he's speaking the truth to the North. And the North is not entirely pleased by that because they don't expect that kind of challenge to come from its leaders, So we have issues that we need to deal with. And in a way, you talk about religious revivalism, which started in the North in the 1970s and continued into the 80s. In a way, you want to think it's a good thing, but then you look at it and you realize that maybe it's not such a great thing sometimes, because we have now issues of fundamentalism going on in the North. You have Boko Haram, and all of them sprouted from this revivalism and all that. So it is also suppressing conversation, and I think that is where I have a problem with it. We need to be more open. We need to have conversations about things in a very civilized context. So yeah.
My question kind of has two parts. The first part is about Nigerian literature and where you see you fit in. I consider Nigeria, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, to be like the diesel engine of African literature. It's got the history. So I'm quite sure that I'd like to hear how you see yourself as fitting into that larger fabric. And the second question is the lid completely off on African literature now? Or are there things within African societies that will maybe not allow the level of creative expression that you might have in the West? And is the West influencing some of those topics and making them more exposed within African literature?
Is the West having this influence? Sometimes we want to look at the West as the big bad wolf that is just waiting to eat up Little Red Riding Hood. But then in some cases you look at it and you say, yeah, maybe they are. because like I mentioned earlier, they are the gatekeepers. They have this publishing infrastructure, so they determine what kind of stories they publish. Sometimes I want to blame them, but sometimes I prefer to take responsibility for whatever it is we do. And I think it's high time we stop the blame game and shifting the buck and do what we really can do. It's easy to say that, well, I mean, the West dictates the kind of stories we tell because they're the ones who accept the manuscripts and publish them. But then if you don't have people like Cassava Republic and other publishers challenging and creating avenues for the stories to get out, then you have a problem, you know. The second question you asked?
The first one.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself as fitting into that kind of mythical, or legendary, this literary? When you're in there with people like Chinua Achebe and
I guess when I get there, I'll find out. For now, I only think about writing, and writing what I hope will be good stories that people all over the world would relate with. I'm very conscious of what I write about, and I'm conscious of the background I come from. But I'm equally very conscious that I want my stories to have a universal appeal. Universal in the sense that I want people in rural England and maybe small-town America to read the book and connect to the universal human concern that my characters share. Like I said, I am from the North, and we have this issue of, if you like, call it ordernization. You know, everyone is the order. You know, even in the Nigerian context, not to talk about the global universal context. So this organization is something I'm really keen on taking down, you know, and to break down barriers so that people are conscious that, yes, Hajia Binta, who is the character in my novel, is a Muslim, is a northerner, but then she has universal concerns that an average American has, that an average Japanese person has. So those are the things that I'm really interested in. Where I situate myself, I don't think I'm in a position to judge yet. Someday, I guess we'll find out. Yes, please. Hello.
I was curious how this novel and even your earlier collection of short stories, how people reacted in northern Nigeria, and you know, is this novel, is it widely available? Can people read it? And you know, to what extent have you heard from, you know, ordinary readers? And also, I wonder if you've gotten into any trouble. Your books that had the honor of being, you know, banned, but, you know, is it in any way sort of taboo for people to read it in northern Nigeria?
Fortunately, it hasn't gotten to that level. When the book was launched in Lagos in November 2015, I remember there was someone who was genuinely concerned for my safety. You know, and she felt, you're talking about things Northerners don't talk about. You get in trouble. And she was so concerned that she actually sent me a link to a residency for artists who are threatened. And she strongly encouraged me to apply, just in case. And there were questions about the possibility of a fatwa being declared against me. And yeah, at some point you kind of entertain those concerns, but what I did is that I felt that I'd done, and now this is me being going into a zone that I shouldn't go into, but I had the confidence that I had done justice to this issue in portraying the people of the North and the North itself in a way that is not derogatory, but in a way that is frank and honest, that says, you know, these are the issues you have, and if you look at yourself in the mirror, you would actually see these issues are there. And then you reflect, which is what I want. People should reflect about it and think of making changes. No, I haven't been threatened yet, and The book is widely available in the North. I think we've gone through several reprints in Nigeria already. And yeah, the reception has been good. And I think I've had reactions from readers in the North, women especially, who say, well, you know, these are some really naughty things you talked about, but then to be honest, this is us. You know, and for me, that is the greatest compliment you could get from the people you're writing about. So,
this sort of your answer sort of feeds into my question a bit as to how did you land on the main character of a 55-year-old woman, since typically 55-year-old women aren't the main characters in many novels these days. So.
Is that so? Okay. You know, how the story came to me. I was sitting down minding my business, you know, watching Barcelona. But then I had this vision of this very rascally person jumping over a woman's fence and going into a house to boggle it, and then ends up meeting the owner of the house. So I became really curious about both the burglar and the person who is being boggled. And I said, you know what, just follow them and see what happens. And that was how the story came about. So I've also been really curious about age and sexuality, you know. Especially in Nigeria, it's very common to have a 60-year-old man marrying a girl who is 17 or 18, you know, and nobody frowns about it, or nobody frowns at it. But then if a woman who is 35 is marrying someone who is 27, you know, it becomes a problem. What do you mean she's old enough to be a mother? That is what they will tell you. You know, I remember when I was in secondary school, and I was dating this girl who was in the same class as me. We were the same age. And I took her to see my mom. And my mom was very hospitable. She received her well. And after the girl went, my mom said, she's a nice girl, but she's too old for you. I'm like, okay. But she's my age mate, right? So when I was 26, I dated a girl who was 26. Same age, same everything. And again, of course, I wanted to marry her then because I was 26, right? Not 17 or 18. Our mom said, oh, she's a nice girl, but she's too old for you. So these perceptions are common. In Nigeria, it's common that you should have maybe 5-10 years difference between a man and a woman marrying, but the man has to be older, right? So I was like, if we reverse this role, what if the woman is older, who is having this relationship with this guy who is much younger? What happens? You know, so that was one of the premises I started off with. And then again, you have issues of how would her children react? How would people around react? How would they see these issues? And I felt it's important because most times when we talk about the sexuality of older women, there's a Nigerian term we say sugar mommy, you know, and the general perception is that, oh, she's going into it for the sex, and she has to pay the young guy to agree to sleep with her. And in this scenario, that is not the case. Yes, sex was at the heart of the relationship, but there was something much more. For Binta, there was this desire to redeem this character, you know, the character of Hassan Reza, to make him a better person in her own, you know, fashion. So that was something that was playing in her mind as well. So it wasn't really, I was trying to break this mold of older women being sugar mommies for whatever reason. People can have relationship for something much more profound than for, you know, just the pleasure of it, and then for the sake of making some extra income or something. So,
We'll have one last question.
One last question. Yeah.
I have a copy of your book. Maybe this will become apparent as I read through it. But I'm intrigued by interested in the title. So it's Crimson Blossoms. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about it. And also the fact that each chapter in the book is prefaced by something that looks like a proverb.
Yeah.
one who eats an old man should not complain when one is gray hair. And each chapter really has, that's just one thing that really caught my eye here. And lastly, any plans to turn this into a film?
The title. Well, I think the title came before the book came. So when I wrote the book, I kind of wrote the title into the book so that it works. Anyway, but then I wanted to capture something that is beautiful, and then at the same time has several levels of interpretations. So a season of crimson blossoms is a beautiful season. For Binta, I mean, this blossoming that she had very late on in her life is something beautiful. But then again, it comes with a price. So it's beautiful, and then it's crimson, for God's sake. It's red, which means danger, right? So that's that element. And there's this element of the violence, the level of violence that is that forms the background of the story, which is again red. So those were the things I was trying to capture in the title. And the Proverbs, yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a cute thing to do. So yeah, I wanted to do that really. I put them in when I was writing the story. And then at some points when I was writing, I thought I should take them out. And then the editor said, if you dare touch those Proverbs, I'm going to kill you. So I decided to leave them. That was how they ended up being in the book. Yeah, but then again, it's for me, those Proverbs are some kind of philosophical nuggets, if you look at them that way. And sometimes people want to think philosophy is only associated with the West. But then when you read our Proverbs, you read them, you see meanings, deep meaning, and you kind of wonder, and that was what I did. I wondered, who would sit down and think about this thing and then phrase them in such a way that they are so powerful and short and poignant, And I thought it's a shame that we're letting these things go wasted, and I kind of wanted to capture them and preserve them in my book. So I'm happy they resonate with you. That's good. Okay, I have the mic, so yeah.
Okay. I'm a MFA student at the University of Baltimore, and around. I wanted to know, what African literature what are some of your favorites, or what are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Right now I'm not reading an African book. It's titled A Case of the Exploding Mangoes by Hanif Mohammed. He's Pakistani. That's what I'm reading at the moment. I've been reading a lot of African novels, a lot. The most recent is Tony Khan's The Carnivorous City. So yeah, I've had influences, of course, from the works of Chinua Achebe. Every African writer does, right? Achebe, Cyprian Quincy. Cyprian Quincy is one of my favorite African writers. You talk about Naguib Mahfouz, a Nobel laureate. So yeah, there's this rich background of African literature to draw from, and I'm delighted we have this background and these resources to connect to.
One.
Yeah.
My name is William Malone, and I've lived in Kansas City for many, many years. Yeah. And I want to find out where you come from in the north.
Mm-hmm.
Position. You're able to look at Muslim South and Christian South.
I come from Jos.
Yes, I know.
So does that answer the question? Perhaps, yes. For those who don't know Jos, it is a city in central Nigeria, which is more in the north than in the south. So it's kind of northern Nigeria, but it's central. and it's very cosmopolitan. It has a large population of Muslims and Christians, so you live in proximity to Muslims and Christians. But then again, in 2001, like I mentioned in the novel, there was a complete breakdown of law and order, and there were violence between Muslims and Christians, you know. And the fact now is that Jos is segregated into small communities of Muslim groups here, Christian groups here. So it's difficult for me now to associate the Jos I grew up in with the Jos that exists presently. There are communities that as a Muslim, when you go into now, you don't feel comfortable because you feel threatened. You feel that your life is in danger. And there are communities that if a Christian walks into, he feels threatened as well. So that is the reality that I have today as the background of my life. And it sort of reflects in this book, you know. The fact that I grew up in Jos, in close proximity to all these types of people, gives me I think, the necessary platform to kind of view all these things from a very vantage position. So, yeah. Yeah, good. Thank you.
One last question, and then we'll close our program.
Okay.
You talked about northern Nigeria and barriers and taboos. How much does that reflect what goes on in the rest of Nigeria? Do they deal with similar taboos and barriers? Or is it distinct?
You see, the thing is this, right? Nigeria is a collection of several countries in one. I've heard a writer from southern Nigeria saying that, well, you know, those northerners, they are closer to Malians than they are to me as a Nigerian, because the cultural difference is very significant, you know, hugely significant. But then again, when you look at the Nigerian society as a whole, there are issues that are common to both. For instance, the treatment of widows in the south is well, widows in the south of Nigeria are considerably worse off than their colleagues in the north or their counterparts in the north. But then again, there's this issue of subjugation of women, of subjugation of sexuality and all that. And, you know, for me, one of the things that came up when people read this book in Nigeria, in the north and in the south, there was a writer friend I had from Lagos who read this book and said, you know, I'm a Nigerian, but reading this book is like I'm being introduced to a completely different universe. And that is the extent of the divide. But then there are the issues I talked about, the universal concerns that people connect to wherever they are from. And one of those is that people who had lost their fathers 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, read this book and they say, you know what I don't like about this book? It made me think about my mother's sexuality. Because the assumption is that, oh, my father is dead, so no more sex for her, you know, no more action, whatever, and she's done for. And then you read this book and you realize, well, you know, she's human, she has this human needs, she has this. So I think it has kind of created some kind of understanding for people about the needs of their, you know, widowed mothers or something like that. Yeah, I hope I've somehow answered the question.
Okay. This concludes our program. So we'd like to thank Abubakar. We'd like to thank Abubakar. And again, we will have a book signing down in the gift shop of the library. And that's on the ground floor.
Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.